Good evening, everybody. We're here now on the third seminar in my look at Matthew 24 and 25. And just to get us going with a bit of a recap, I'm going to share the screen, which I think you can see now. Yeah, good. There we are. This is where we started in Matthew. Well, not quite. We started in Matthew 24, verse 1. But the major point in approaching these two chapters is to see how Jesus responded to these three questions from his disciples. Tell us when these things will be, the destruction of the temple, which they had put their hope in, would be there for the signal of the Messiah's return. What will be the sign of your coming? And if you think about that, if they thought the temple was the sign of his coming, if it's not going to be temple, what is? And what will be the sign of the end of the age? And those are the questions he's been answering. And we're now to something of a fulcrum point in what he's saying, because having answered those questions, he's trying to get their thinking right for going forward. And I've divided these two chapters up into three sections. There's three answers. Last time we got as far as the first section of warnings. Today I'm planning to do the next one at the end of chapter 24 and the first parable in chapter 25, leaving the other two sections for the fourth and I hope final part of all this. So that is what I wanted to share with you for now. Stopping screen sharing. So we're on to this next bit, but can I just remind you where we come from in the last section? And I'm only going to do this briefly. In the previous section, Jesus had told them in verse 35 of chapter 24 that heaven and earth would pass away, but his words would not. But of the day and hour he was coming back, no one would know, and nobody does know apart from his Father. But then he likened it to the days of Noah. And the thing about Noah's day is that the people were being warned, but not listening. And so verse 39, they did not understand, they did not know until the cataclysm came and took them all away. And it will be just like that when the Son of Man comes back. And then he talks about two people being in the field, one being taken, one being left, two women at the mill, one being taken and the other being left. And my strong conviction is that that should be tied in the verse 39, that the ones who get taken away are the ones who are taken away to judgment, and the ones who are preserved are the ones who's preserved to be with the Lord. And he then ends up by saying, watch therefore, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming. But know this, that if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not allowed his house to be broken into. Therefore, you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. And that's where we're starting. But I wanted to tie that in because what he's been getting to them, having moved on from their questions, he's been saying the people won't be ready, but you need to be ready. And he says we get ready, and he goes on to explain how we get ready. And verse 44 sets the scene for our study in this session and the next one, and it is basically his fundamental warning. he's saying the people, the unbelievers, will not be ready for his return. And he's saying there is a danger that even some of his servants will not be ready. So I'm wondering if somebody would like to read for us, please, verses 44 to 51. Would somebody like to read that? And if you're muted, please turn your thing on. Hazel's waving a hand, so yes, please, Hazel.
Okay. 44, you said.
44 to 51.
Yeah, okay. Therefore, you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. Who then is a faithful and wise servant, whom his master made ruler over his household, to give them food in due season? Blessed is that servant whom his master, when he comes, will find so doing. Assuredly, I say to you, that he will make him ruler over all his goods. But if that evil servant says in his heart, my master is delaying his coming, and begins to beat his fellow servants and to eat and drink with the drunkards, the master of that servant will come on a day when he is not looking for him, and at an hour that he is not aware of, and will cut him in two and appoint his portion with the hypocrites. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth.
Thank you. This is a really strong passage. It's a really strong warning that Jesus is giving his disciples. He has asked the question, who then is a faithful and wise servant? And this is something I think we should all want to know the answer to. We want to be faithful and we want to live wisely in this life so that we're ready for the return of Jesus. And he's speaking here particularly about a faithful and wise servant whom his masters made ruler or responsible over his household to give them food in due seasons. Now, do you remember that Paul told Timothy that those, I think it was Timothy, not Titus, Timothy, that those who teach will be doubly judged? To me, I think he's saying something here about those, Jesus is talking about those in particular who he gives the responsibility to look after his household. The household is not the property, it's the people. And he's given the job of feeding them in due season. Now, to me, that sounds like a Bible teacher, somebody with the job of feeding people. And Jesus says, some of you will be given this job. How are you going to do that job? And he says there's two options. There's the servant who's going to be blessed when his master comes, because he'll find him doing exactly that, serving people, feeding people, building them up. And Jesus says, I tell you, the servant who comes like that, the master will make him ruler or manager of all his goods. And the point here is that the wise servant will keep doing that no matter how long the master takes to come back. Now, if we go back to the shoes of the disciples who'd asked him these questions first and foremost, let's remember that they, up to this point, had been expecting Jesus to bring in the kingdom in the next couple of years or so. They were not prepared for a long wait before he established his kingdom. Sorry, I'm turning my phone off, Mary, in case it rings again. Who then is the faithful and wise servant? Sorry, the disciples were thinking that he'd be back very soon. And here he's telling to them, you're going to have a long wait. It's a fundamental warning he gives. And he's saying to them, no matter how long I take to come back, you keep up with your job, with the responsibilities I've given you of feeding my people. And that does carry across to us, because some have been given that job of being teachers, shepherds, feeders of God's people, and they need to be faithful until he comes back. So in chapter 24, verse 48, we get the other side of this coin. He says, having talked about the faithful and wise, he now talks about the bad servant. And I do wish the English Bibles wouldn't always translate the Greek word for bad as evil. It seems it goes too far in our mind. A bad servant is one who says in his heart, my master is delaying his coming. And when he thinks his master's not getting back as soon as he expected, he begins to think of himself. And he begins to want to rule as the Gentiles do, lord it over people. He wants to be the kingpin. And he begins to boss his fellow servants around. Rather than treating them as his master's dear servants, he treats them as his underlings. And he gets into bad company, and he starts to eat and drink with the drunkards. You see, what happens? This bad servant begins to serve himself rather than his master. And Jesus is saying the likelihood of a servant whose heart isn't right in doing that will increase with the length of the master's delay in returning. But Jesus carries on, and he says, here's the problem. The master of that servant will come on a day when the servant isn't looking for him. Why? Because he's probably drunk. He's out with his friends. Or he's sat in the master's chair, getting the rest of the servants to run round and treat him as if he was their master. And the master will come and find him not doing what he'd been charged with, and he will cut him in two. I do wish the Bible wasn't so graphic, you know. He will cut him in two and appoint him his portion with the hypocrites. Oh, question. Where do hypocrites end up? What's the portion of the hypocrites? Is it not where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth forever and ever? And I want you to think about two things here, and then I'm going to throw it on for a bit of a discussion. From this, we see that Jesus here is talking to his disciples, and he's saying, I am your master. I'm going away for a long time, and I'm giving you an opportunity to serve me by serving others. But you have to be careful. You have two options. You can keep your eyes on me, and serve me as you want me to, as I want you to, and by serving your fellow servants, or you can get too big for your boots, think you're in my shoes, start lording it over the others, and you'll end up in bad company. If you do what I want you to do, when I come back, you'll get your reward. If you take your eyes off me and start looking after your own interests, you will end up with the unbelievers. And note here that this master doesn't come back and say, now I notice you've not been doing the job I told you to be doing. Are there any mitigating circumstances? Would you like to explain yourself? He doesn't even ask. He's seen the evidence and he says, you don't deserve mercy. You will reap what you've sown. And that is quite challenging. You know, I must admit, I'd never really thought about this till prepping for tonight. Teachings like this from Jesus really do undermine the whole teaching that we find in the church, where people say, oh, once you become a Christian, you can't lose your salvation. Jesus is telling this to his disciples. Oh, and Judas was amongst them. He's saying to them, that I'm coming back and I will reward you with what you deserve. If you've been faithful servants, you will get a reward. But if you've been unfaithful, you'll be going where everybody else who's been unfaithful is going. And I want to lay the foundation here, and I want us to have a bit of time to talk about, if we want to, that this is a severe warning, because it runs through these chapters. Servants who fail, people who are not ready when they should have been. And it does raise this question, why do we want to hang on to this idea that once I've prayed a prayer or done whatever I've been told to do, I'm secure for eternity? I don't think Jesus is teaching that here. I think he's saying to them, I'm going for a long time, and that time will be a time of testing for you. Please take it seriously, keep your eyes on me, and don't fail. So I'm going to take a break there, having laid quite a strong foundation. And I don't know if other people would like to come in and say things and comment on what we've looked at already. So I'm going to have a break and see if anybody wants to comment. Anybody? Have I gone off at too fast a rate?
Could I just mention something that I noticed earlier when I was looking at a parallel passage in Luke 12? Right. Which seems to be a bit of a sort of condensing of quite a lot of different things, but it's a very strong chapter of warnings from Jesus in various ways. But it's the bit that struck me, and I think it sort of goes with what you're saying about those who've been given responsibility, as usual, in verse 41, after some of these things are more or less a repeat of what we just looked at.
Yeah.
It's Peter who says, as usual, wanting to clarify where he stands, Lord, are you addressing this parable to us or to everyone else as well? Now, it doesn't give him a clear, specific answer, but I think at the end of it, I think if it ties in with what you're just saying, then it is to the disciples.
Yeah.
And the following warnings and consequences seem even stronger, about being given a heavy flogging if you know what to do and you haven't done it. And those who have been given much is required of them, and so on.
Yeah.
So I just thought that was an interesting sort of clarification, really, on that. I suppose my other outstanding question from what you just said is, you said very much this is to do with those who teach, but would you say this is a general principle anyway for believers who are servants in various other ways when it comes to faithfulness?
I think his first application, because he talks about feeding the people, is teachers, but he also in another place, not in these chapters, talks about people who've been given different number of, as we call them, talents.
True. Yeah.
Different giftings. And he says everybody, no matter how many giftings they've been given, it will be held responsible for how they use them. So even if he's not meaning it here in this parable, I would say that the principle is found in that place at least, that the people with more giftings are responsible and the people with less giftings are responsible. The danger for those with less, if that parable's a guide, is that they hide their light under a bushel. They say, I don't want to lose anything, so I won't use it, I'll keep it safe, rather than saying, hang on, this is given to me to use. So I think it is there in scripture, and I don't think it's too much to take it out of here, but I think if we make it general, which I think is my experience over the years, we miss this point of the servant who's there to care for the rest of the servants.
Thank you.
Any other?
Just a minor point, really. In verse 51, an alternate reading is not cut in pieces, but severely scourged.
Right.
But if you're going doom the pit anyway, it doesn't really matter whether you're cut in pieces or severely scourged, does it really? It's
No.
but it's very, I mean, that bit, it's like in Matthew 13 where Jesus says he's not going to tell the people anymore because they're not going to believe anyway. It'll just make them even more liable. And as you say, people who are given the gift and never use it. I've heard a number of people say, oh, my father, my mother, my whatever, I'm sure they were a believer, but they never said anything, you know. I thought,
Yeah.
well, if you didn't know, as a friend of mine said, he's sure his father was a believer, but he never appeared to tell him anything about it, you know.
Right.
You know, I didn't. It's an onerous task.
I think on that, Philip, a lot of us would like to think our family, etc., are believers and give them space, but we end up giving ourselves space as well. So, you know, it is by their fruits you will know them in
Yeah.
the end. Anybody else?
There's that passage in Corinthians where it says that there will be rewards, and there are vessels of honor and vessels, clay vessels being used. That doesn't seem to match with this passage. This passage is very strong. It comes across as very strong, and those who are called to serve in a special way, or they are teachers, it seems that this is the judgment for them, rather than people who, or Christians, let's say, who didn't quite, how to put it, produce so much fruit.
Yeah. I think you might be mixing up two passages, Magdalene.
Yeah.
The vessels for honor and other for dishonor is Romans 9:21.
Oh,
And I think the one you're mentioning in Corinthians is the one where he talks about some men build with gold, silver, and precious stones, and others build with wood, hay, and stubble.
mhm,
And everybody's work will be tested by fire.
mhm.
And even if their work's destroyed, those who've built with poorer materials that get destroyed will still be saved by the skin of their teeth.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think what I would say about that passage is God sees the heart. They've not been wise builders, but they've been trying to build. Mary's got a hand up. Have you got the passage, love? You've muted.
Yeah.
I think it's in 2 Timothy, the one.
Right.
I think that the Romans one was, it does talk about vessels for honor, but I wonder if this is the one Magdalene was thinking about. In a great house there are not only vessels of gold and silver, but also of wood and clay, some for honor and some for dishonor.
Yeah.
Right.
Therefore, if anyone cleanses himself from the latter, he will be a vessel for honor, sanctified and useful for the master, prepared for every good work. So that to me sounds like the encouragement is to be a vessel for honor.
Yeah. Yeah.
To aim high, if you like. So that's 2 Timothy 2, verse 20 and 21.
Yeah.
Was that the one you meant, Magdalene?
Yes.
All right. Yeah. The 1 Corinthians 1 is 1 Corinthians 3.
3, yeah. Building with.
From about verse 9 onwards. Yeah.
Like this thing.
And the Timothy one is sanctify yourself, is what Mary read, isn't it? Yeah. Was somebody else wanted to come in? Anita?
Randall, I was just thinking that in the context of what Jesus said here is that the master's delay, actually, Jesus' imminent return is delayed. And so it produces 2 effects. You could apply it to teachers who've been given that responsibility of teaching, but I think it doesn't negate, as individuals, our responsibility when it comes to the talents, our responsibilities that God has given us, in that I think it's a severe warning in that for some Christians, and I include myself in it, we may have lost the anticipation of Jesus coming back because of so many things happening. Our focus has been diverted. So for the evil slave in this particular instance, his mindset has lost the fear of the master's return, and so now it's showing itself in his action by, behaving in a manner that will beat his other fellow servants. And I think that there is a practical application for both teachers and both for us as individuals, whereby the way we think about Jesus returning should affect the way we live? Are we living in preparation and reverent fear that God will come back at any minute and we have to give an account? Or are we living carelessly thinking, oh, well, he's going to be delayed. Now I can indulge in all my naughty things because I got time to repent. So you got that kind of mindset going on here, I think.
Oh, yeah. You've certainly got people taking their eyes off the major thing, which is the master has gone away, but he will be coming back.
I think one of the things is, doesn't it say that the slave thinks the master doesn't say he's delaying.
No.
It's the servants or slaves that
Yeah.
think, oh, well, he's delaying.
Mhm.
He's not delaying at all. He's coming at the time he said he's going to come.
Yeah, it's verse 48, that's right. Yeah.
But by telling this account, he is saying to the disciples, I'm telling you I'm going away for a long time. Don't you get into the way of thinking I'll be back soon, and when I don't come back, start getting things wrong. So in the story, you're right, Philip, he doesn't say to him how long he's going to be away for. But Jesus, in telling the parable, is making the point, I'm going for a long time, but I'll be watching throughout and I'll be aware. Okay, let's move on to the next section. So would somebody please like to read chapter 25, the first 13 verses? Chapter 25, verses 1 to 13. Any volunteers? Philip, I can see a gloved hand waving.
Yeah. And the kingdom of heaven will be comparable to 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. And 5 of them were foolish and 5 were prudent. When the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them, but the prudent took oil in flasks along with their lamps. Now, while the bridegroom was delaying, they all got drowsy and began to sleep. But at midnight, there was a shout, behold, the bridegroom, come out to meet him. Then all those virgins rose and trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said to the prudent, give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out. But the prudent answered, saying, no, there will be not enough for us and you two. Go instead to the dealers and buy some for yourselves. And while they were going away to make the purchase, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the wedding feast, and the door was shut. And later the other virgins also came, saying, Lord, Lord, open up for us. But he answered and said, truly I say to you, I do not know you. Be on the alert then, for you do not know the day nor the hour.
Thank you, Philip. So, right. Now we come on to a parable. Why do I say it's a parable? Because we start as he starts the parables. The kingdom of heaven, or the kingship of heaven, shall be likened to 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. We're going to look at it in a minute, but just notice here, the rest of the story says, no, they didn't go out. They sat and waited for the bridegroom, and they were meant to be ready to go out and meet the bridegroom. But the first question I've got for you is this word lamps. They took their lamps. Anybody ever been told what these lamps look like? Anybody want to volunteer what they look like? I'm looking for a
like a teapot.
Pardon?
Like a teapot, Randall.
Like a teapot. Tracy, do you mean something like this? Hang on, I'm just about to share it.
I can see Pop
Yeah,
there,
like
hand up.
teapot, yeah,
Yeah,
like that one.
yeah, I think so.
That's what we got from Nazareth as well. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Is that the type of thing you've been told?
Yes.
Yes.
You're just
Yeah,
kidding.
John's got one. John's got a real one. Look, it's massive, isn't it? It's
Teapot.
massive. And we sing, "This little light of mine." Right? Now,
You got it from
somehow, I've got to ask you a question. Has anybody ever told you it looks like that? Their lamps. You know what that is? Can you make it out? It's a stick with oil-soaked rags on the end burning. A torch.
torch. Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Anybody ever heard it explained like that? Well, I hadn't either, but I did look up in preparing for this, the IVP Bible background commentary. And in there, it is quite clear that the custom of, they're not sure about in Israel, though they call it Palestine, so I'll slap their wrists for that. But they're not sure what happened in Israel then, but certainly the Greek and the Romans, when they had a wedding, the bridesmaids or the virgins would carry burning torches, not little lamps, out to meet the bridegroom. So there is precedent for it. And to me, those two pictures give you a very different feel about them. As I said, the one in the hand is this little light of mine. The one on end of the stick, if you took the little lamp outside, how helpful would it be? If you take the big stick out, that's going to be more helpful. So let's look at the scriptures, right? The word in this passage used is Strong's 2985. I'm not going to pronounce it, but he says it's a lamp or a flambeau, lamp light torch. Before we look at how else it's used in the New Testament, I want to say, compare it with Matthew 15, also in Mark, Luke, and twice in Luke, where Jesus said, "No, do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand. And it gives light to all who are in the house." And you've got one of those flaming torches and stuck it underneath the barrel. What would happen to the barrel? It'd kind of burn, wouldn't it? So you'll be interested to know that the actual Greek word used in Matthew 5:15 and elsewhere is not the same word as here. It is 308, and it's a portable lamp or other illuminator, a candle or a light. So these are two Greek words used, it appears, for different things. I'll just make that point further. The one that's used in Matthew 25 for these virgins occurs in John 8, verse 3, when Judas and the chief priests and the Pharisees came out there with lanterns, torches, and weapons. Now, I don't think any of us ever thought that word torches meant those little Herodian lamps. I think we all knew it meant like burning rags on the end of a stick. When Paul preached or properly dialogued until midnight, there were many lamps in the upper room where they were gathered together. We've seen pictures of these torches in brackets on walls giving light to large rooms. this is quite interesting. In Revelation 4:5, when we see the throne and there's lightnings, thundering, and voices coming out of it, it says 7 lamps or torches of fire were burning before the throne, which are the 7 spirits of God. And later it says, when the third angel sounded, a great star fell from heaven, burning like a torch, all the same word, and it fell on 1/3 of the rivers and on the springs of water. So I think the word Jesus used here is not for this tiny lamp. It's for a blazing torch. And as usual, all these references will be in the notes I put up eventually. And to me, that gives me a very different feeling about these virgins who are pictures of the church, right? We are meant to be a light that shines brightly, not a little flame that flickers. Going to stop sharing there, folks, because that's the end of all my screen sharing for tonight, which is good. So I am saying we are looking at these virgins who were meant to take with them not just torches, but a significant amount of oil to keep them burning. Some people think they last for about 15 minutes and then you'd have to dip them in more oil and relight them. I don't know if John and Rose have, it looked like they might have used their little lamp. I don't know how long it burns for now, he's shaking his head. But, you know, the little lamps that you used to get and put paraffin or things in, they used to burn for quite a while before you had to top them up. So they were meant to be beacons to show not just the bridegroom the way back, but to show everybody that he was approaching. But we're told that half of them were much wiser than the other half, right? And in the New King James Version, it says in verse 3, those who were foolish took their lamps and took no oil with them. Jane Darby, by the way, in his translation, just to bring back my point, he says, he translates it, those who were foolish took their torches and did not take oil with them. By contrast, the wise took oil in their vessels with their lamps or their torches. Now, what I want you to notice here is the foolish didn't just take too little oil, they took no oil. That brings into question, because the way I've been taught it since Sunday school days is that they had enough in their little lamp to keep it going for a while, but it was a bit longer. But here the text actually says, if it's recording Jesus properly, they did not take any oil with them. So how, if there were these torches, how did they expect to light them in the first place? Just something to be thinking about. But verse 5, while the bridegroom was delayed, it took longer than expected, all of them got drowsy and slept. Now, there is a warning here, and I think it's a warning that Paul heeded. I'm not going to read it, But if you make a note of 1 Thessalonians 5, verses 1 to 10, we have the place where Paul is saying, I don't need to write to you about the times and the seasons, particularly about the day of the Lord, because he'll come as a thief in the night. When they say peace and safety, sudden destruction will come upon them, and they'll have labor pains as a pregnant woman. But then he says, but you, brethren, are not to be in darkness, so that this day should overtake you as a thief. You are all sons of light and sons of the day. We are not of night or of darkness. Therefore, let us not sleep as others do, but let us watch and be sober. And it seems to me that Paul has heeded the warning that Jesus is giving through this parable. Because and all of them went there, all of them, it says, all slumbered and went to sleep. But somebody should have been watching. Back in 1 Thessalonians 5, and again, we need to put statements in context. Here he's talking about those who should not be asleep. And having said, let us not sleep, he says, those who are asleep, those who get sleep at night, those who get drunk are drunk at night. Remember our foolish servant who started serving himself rather than the master? He got drunk. But let those of us who are of the day be sober, putting on the breastplate of faith and love and a helmet of salvation. For God has not appointed us to wrath, but to obtain salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ. There's a certain amount of conditionality here, even in Paul's words. Don't go to sleep. Don't get like those who get drunk at night. Keep awake, keep sober, put on these things that you might not end up where they're going.